Hi, everybody. Welcome to Environmental Law, Class 14. So, this is our last lecture of the year. Next week, you're going to do your presentations, and then the week after that is the final. Well, not really the final, but the third test. It's not a cumulative final. It's us on the last three chapters. So we're really on the home stretch, and as you may have noticed, this is a shorter chapter. So it'll be shorter lectures and things like that for this class. This class is dedicated to mining. Um, so mining is a huge United States industry. It's essential, it's an essential industry in our country. Uh, about 1 million United States jobs are related to mining. Um, One of the reasons why we like mining or promote mining is coal as a source of energy is a source to as an alternate to foreign oil. So we don't have to if we the more coal we use, the less we have to deal with the politics and the of foreign oil and the market the market spikes and the fluctuations. That's the word I'm looking for. Other things besides coal that we mined are they call them mined aggregates, which think of like gravel, right? And stone and sand that we use as part of, say, concrete or fill for construction. Um, then we have our metals like iron, copper, silver, lead, zinc, and then non-metals like phosphates, which are used um, as fertilizer and things like that. Gypsum is used as like a part of concrete as well. These are kind of softer ones than like sand with like fracking with oils in it. So you harvest the sand and then you separate the sand from the petroleum and then you make oil that way. Um, and a lot of states, which you have mines in, have laws that really encourage these mining activities. You also have to have a lot of work safety laws because mining is extremely dangerous. You're underground. There's explosives. Um, Things that you're breathing in are can be hazardous to your health. Coal dust and things like that. So there's a lot of work safety laws. OSHA gets involved, and states have their own work safety laws. If you're interested in kind of generally stuff about state laws and things like that for mining, you can go to the National Mining Association, which is nma.org. But even though we love mining, and this is kind of part of our discussion board, where I think our first class I talked about how environmental law is a balance in our country, right? We want economic advancement, we want industrialization, we want to be able to compete with other countries economically and to manufacture what our country needs. Um, but we can't do that to the extent where we deplete or ruin our environment. Okay, so that it's a balancing act, and that's kind of what your discussion board is about this week, kind of as a close to our weekly lecture part of the class. But so there for mining, economically, we like it. We like having not being dependent on foreign fuel and being able to get our own materials for construction like gypsum and phosphates and iron and all of that stuff. But mining has environmental consequences. Okay, so just generally, if you live next to a mine, there might be explosions and vibrations, right? So it's not really a great neighbor to be next to a mining area. Um, you also, if you live nearby, there are risks of what we call surface subsidence, right? So, where if there's been a lot of area dug out, you might like have, the earth collapsing, or even maybe sinkholes, right? Things going because it's hollow underneath. Um, Mining can result in air pollution, these particulates, right? Dust in the air from the digging and the blasting. And then when you smelt, which is, it's a way of, kind of processing the ore, like you burn it, so there's chemical smells and things emitted into the air. Also, when you're digging, you can get, methane, right? So methane is a gas that is hazardous if you don't properly ventilate the mine, right? It can cause the mine to explode. And then even maybe and methane is a greenhouse gas. So if it is being ventilated and just let out into our air, it contributes to global warming. And one of the things they might do as a way to process the methane is to actually capture it as an energy source, because methane, like propane, right? It's something that burns. We can use that as an energy source. Um, so the mining can cause changes to the water table. It might, if it raises the water table, it causes flooding. If it lowers it, then your wells and your water is drying up. Also, pollution to the water and soil through acid, through leach it, right? So if you're kind of the residual, the stuff that is left after you mine, can get into the rivers, and sediment that goes into like the water and the soil, and then it leaches out into the groundwater. And then as you take things out, right, they're not replaced, so you have depleted these natural resources. And all over the country, we have these abandoned mines, right? So just like holes in the ground that, they're no longer working mines. They no longer have valuable natural resources in there, and they've just kind of been left there. So we kind of have to figure out what to do with those abandoned mines. Different kinds of mining. So dredging, so that's like mining from water, right? Big scoops of water. Surface mining. Think of like quarries, right? You have there's a difference between open cast, like coal and limestone. I know if you've ever, what is that? Is it on 90, 80 East? You go over like a giant quarry where the limestone has been pulled out and the gravel, which I think quarries are like so cool. It's just like this giant hole in the ground that, or there's also that's open cast and then open pit where, you just kind of dig a hole and then maybe there's copper or diamonds in there. I don't think we have diamond mines in the United States, but it's a type of mining. And then more commonly are these underground mines, right? Where we have to go underground to find these materials. So for underground mines, right, they're dug out or blasted out. You have to have two ways to get in, ways for the workers to get in and out, ways for the ore, right, whatever you're mining, to get out. So you want like two ways to get in and out. There's also something called in situ mining, where they inject water into the ground, kind of this, and then it's pumped up. This water is pumped to the surface, and then that, the water and the mined material come up, and then the water, it's dried out. So then you have the mined material. And any kind of mining, right? You're moving dirt or land, and there might be residual from what you have after you process the item that you have mined. So, big question is like, where do you put that? Different kinds of processing, right? So sometimes you're just making it smaller, right? So you have like a big rock and you're crushing it into gravel. They call that beneficiation. Thank you. And where you're kind of reducing this particle size into gravel or sand, what you need to use it in. Sometimes you're trying to change the chemical composition or the structure, smelting, that's with heat. You might be putting acid on it or electrolytic refining, something with like electricity to refine it. But all of these things generate waste. Slag is the name of like kind of like your big pit that of waste and left over from mining, especially coal mining. And then you also have tailings. So tailings are, it's not like really kind of like gross, but it's like you take, if you're taking copper out of a rock, it's the rock that's left over, right? And then you don't put that back in the mine, but it's waste that is no longer where it was. These are just some examples of slag piles. I mean, kind of crazy. They almost look like volcanic mountains, but these are, this is the coal residue. This one's in Pennsylvania, I think, or West Virginia, one of our coal mining states. And if you want to look at it on a bigger screen, you can come back to the PowerPoint later. And then this, I don't know if any of you guys watched The Crown or any seasons of The Crown, but you might remember in one of the seasons where Queen Elizabeth was a young queen and there was a disaster in Wales where this slag heap, it rained and it just collapsed, and it collapsed into a school. And 116 children and 28 adults died from the collapse of this slag heap. So, really, terrible tragedy from slag. So, making sure you have a place to put the waste is really important. So mining waste, it's, we have our RCRA, disposal of waste, our cradle to grave. A lot of these mining wastes are excluded from RCRA, right? They're called special wastes. And this exclusion has been upheld by the Supreme Court. So mining waste is really like an issue. The slag, if it gets into the water or leaches into the water, can pollute the watershed. There's in the book, they talk about all the waterways that are polluted from mining activities, and that we have over 500,000 abandoned mine sites. So, it's really an issue, and it looks like it's excluded from things like RCRA because we're kind of trying to encourage mining because it's such an economically important part of our country. So we have some different, these are some of the earlier laws to deal with mining and how we allow mining in our country. So one of the earlier ones is this mining law of 1872, which was really designed for our Western United States as we're getting settlers out there. So in the mining law of 1872, a citizen can go and stake out this claim on any public land out west, right, that it's owned by the federal government. And then once they stake it out, they file a claim with the clerk in the county where the claim is, and then the Bureau of Land Management, and I'll refer to that as BLM after that. And they can, and then they can mine the land. They don't have to give any royalties to the government. They don't own the land. So they don't have a patent to the land. They don't own the land. It remains in the U.S. name, but they can, if they are done with their time mining, they can sell their rights to the mine under the mining law of 1872. So this kind of seemed a little antiquated after a while. So this Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976 changed it up a little bit. Said that if you had this claim, you had to file an annual report with the Bureau of Land Management, and you had to pay an annual maintenance fee. If you do, if you don't want to do that, you'd have to try to get a patent, like a deed to that federal land, but those are very hard to get. So another one is, so that's kind of like your claim, the claim law. Then there's also a Mining Leasing Act of 1920, where the Bureau of Land Management gives leases to companies and individuals to mine public lands. So for those, there are royalties and fees to the United States, and the leases are for a term of years. So it's not like you have an unlimited lease, for forever. Newer than that is the Federal Coal Leasing Act of 1976. And it's kind of like they almost have like an auction or a sale for coal leases on periodically, the Bureau of Land Management, and you can't bid on a mine. So even if you're like the only one there, you can't bid on a mine for less than fair market value. And there is an annual rental fee for these leases, and there are royalties to the government. And I think that one is based on the amount of ore that is taken out of the mine every year. Outside of this, like Western United States, most of our mining rights are held by private landowners. So if there's a mine in West Virginia or something, there are private landowners who own them. They're not owned by the federal government or the state. And if the land is not, if we don't have owned land, if it's public land, you'd have to work to get one of those leases with the government or purchase someone else's rights to mine the land. So that's kind of how the property ownership of mines occur in our country. So 1977, the Congress came up with a way to help the environmental impacts of mining, called the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977, SMCRA. And, they were reacting to these effects of strip mining. And for coal mines that were currently active, it imposed regulations on them. And then it created a fund to perform what we call reclamation. So reclamation is kind of fixing the abandoned coal mines, right? Filling it in and repairing the site to a usable piece of land. Okay, there is an agency that has been tasked with enforcing the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. It's called the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement, OSM. And they call it like a cooperative federalism approach, which, we've seen this before in the Clean Water Act, where the states can have their own enforcement and implementation programs that have to be approved by the OSM, and they have to meet the minimum federal standards to be approved. So, most states have their own mining enforcement agency and process, but some states who don't, then the OSM does the enforcement for that state. Okay, I'm going to cut this off because I think we're about halfway through. What I would maybe like you to do now is work on the discussion board on this, I call as Perspectives on Environmental Law, where we kind of look back on some of the laws we have studied this semester. You can pick whichever one you want and give me your opinion on how you think the government is doing on balancing economic development and environmental issues, and give me a specific example in that area. So I'm going to pause it and we'll come back in a few.